What piece of junk did you find that turned out to be valuable? A first or second edition of the Oregon Trail book. It's a bit damaged, so not that valuable, but still a few hundred more than the $15 I paid for it. But now you have dysentery. I found a small envelope with a few inches of wire in a junk shop. Bought it for $2 because it had some faded penciling about troy ounces. Turned out to about 1.5 troy ounces of platinum wire. Sold it for $600. Years ago I bought a condo in foreclosure. We couldn't go inside, just look from the outside and put in a bid. My bid won. When I went inside the place it was pretty trashed. I checked all the rooms, calculating the costs of getting it back into shape. At the end of my walkthrough I went into the garage and saw there was a car under a tarp. I pulled the tarp back and saw a 1972 Barracuda in nearly mint condition. Found a fake Cartier watch in Goodwill for $10. Bought it because it still looked nice. But it's a real Cartier watch and it's worth $1,000 or more. Keeping it because I'd never buy myself something like that. But you did, albeit for $10. I found a very small, round piece of metal on the floor in my workplace. I couldn't figure out what the item was and knew I should just discard it, but felt compelled to keep it for some reason. That afternoon my coworker was distraught. The unique type of battery that her cochlear implant needed fell out and was probably in a dumpster somewhere because the cleaners had come through. I gave her the weird piece of metal in my pocket and she almost burst into tears from relief. Dad carried around a junk guitar for 50 years. Ugly as hell sunburst Gibson acoustic, circa 50s or 60s, can't remember, that he eventually sanded down into something prettier. When I was learning he took it to be tuned up by our neighbor who owned a shop and was a collector. Dude came back exasperated and told us that my dad had sanded down about $50,000 off the guitar and that it would have been totally worthless if he hadn't left the logo on. Someone gave me a hideous purse out of a box on its way to Goodwill. I sold it on eBay for $1,100. I've had some good flips, but that was the best. Old folded up piece of paper in the bottom of a box my dad and I found cleaning up the house, torn up and faded. Turned out to be a 90-year-old Jane Carlu poster worth roughly $20,000 after spending $1,000 for restoration. Well, a dickhead couch surfer who crashed in my guest room for a few months left behind a 1970s Fender Super Twin Tube amp worth $1,800 he didn't know about. It made cleaning up his piss bottles worth it. Please tell me you played it. The piss bottles. I played Africa by Toto on them. It was magical. A few years ago, I was looking through the Goodwill website that lets you bid on stuff that you find. I stumbled across one of the Texas Goodwill pages and then saw an auction for a huge box of phone accessories that no one was bidding on. I started looking through all the pictures, started researching some of the brands, and started realizing the whole box was worth a decent bit. I took a shot and made my bid. Someone else saw what I saw and started a bidding war with me, but I eventually won with a bid of $106, then $24 for shipping. Few days go by and I finally get the box, well, 2 boxes, and they were both huge. Started taking inventory and ended up with 100 iPhone chargers, 100 Android chargers, about 250 iPhone 8 cases in all different styles, 80 battery packs, a few iPad cases, and about 1,000 screen protectors. Turned my $130 total investment into an eBay business and made almost $8,000 in about 9 months. Bought a cheap Martin guitar because I was broke and wanted to play. I didn't think much of it at the time, but it's worth a few grand now because it was a limited edition thing. It's still appreciating to the point where I had to insure it. My friends and I were at a concert and found this broken bracelet under a merch table as we were about to leave the venue. It had an interesting engraving on it, something about being a son and friend. Because it was broken we were thinking about just tossing it, but ended up throwing it in our backpack to bring to the office later. My friend worked at the venue, so she was going to turn it in. The next week I was browsing Reddit on a thread of the same kind of music we were listening to at the show, and just as I was about to fall asleep someone's post caught my eye. It said something like, "This is a long shot, but I lost something," and it piqued my interest, so I clicked it. It was someone from that same show asking if anyone had found a silver bracelet. Turns out it was the same one we found, and it seemed to be a special gift from the person's parent and they were looking for it. We connected and got the bracelet returned to the guy, and the whole interaction is actually in my Reddit history. It's a fun albeit quick read. So my family went to a nearby town's vintage sale thing. My dad found this dirty old glass milk bottle, and he got excited when he found it. I didn't know what he found so exciting, since it was just a milk bottle. After we got home, he explained that it was a milk bottle from a dairy farm. One of the co-founders of that farm was my great-great-grandfather on my dad's side. When one of the world wars began, he sold it off to the other founder. Too long didn't read. My dad found a glass milk bottle, and I found out I'm a descendant of wealthy dairy farmers. My mom in college worked for a small grocery store. She was sweeping aisles one day when she found a bracelet and just threw it in the lost and found for someone to come back for it later. Months went by, and I guess the employees got to check the lost and found for anything they wanted if no one claimed it. She remembered the bracelet and just grabbed it. She got it home and cleaned it up. It ended up being a Tivol bracelet wrapped with real diamonds. It's since been turned into a new wedding band for her, lol. Typical, not me but a friend. She found a copy of a Salvador Dali painting at Goodwill. She loved him, and it was a big print, so she grabbed it for like $20. She took it home and took it out of the old junky frame, and it had a stamp of authenticity on the back, and she had it assessed, and it's worth $20,000. Lucky itch. Ha. My mom did the same thing, except hers was a Tabuna painting, and she found it for $2 and sold it for around $15,000. I was at an estate sale and bought a few paintings. A sweet lady told me to take the last one I liked as a package deal since I ran out of cash. Turns out one off them is a pretty rare original print worth about $3,500, and I paid maybe $30 for all 4 prints and paintings I wanted. Not me but my mom. She lives in a senior's home. Somebody died, no family, so everyone just throws his in the trash. My mom went out by the dumpster before the garbage truck got there to see if anything was worth grabbing. There was a very small lockbox, the cheap kind, and when she shook it, it sounded like it had a few coins inside. She worked all afternoon to jimmy it open, and inside was over $600 in cash and $250 in rare coins. I found a book at a trash bin. The Wind in the Willows. I never got to read it as a kid. After finishing it, I googled the edition date. Turns out it's a collectible worth $300. Who knew? My father-in-law goes junking occasionally for side cash and strange gifts. One day he shows up randomly with a first-gen Fatboy PS3 with backwards compatibility. He goes, "Hey, I don't know if you can use this, but I thought you might enjoy it." Somebody had it sitting out for garbage. I fired it up fully expecting to have to do some repairs, but it booted up and plays just fine. He refused to take any money for it. He can be a real stand-up guy. A couple years ago I bought a rifle bipod at an antique store for like $15. I was going to keep it for an airsoft gun, but it didn't have any markings on it and couldn't figure out what it was, so I made a post on a gun forum asking for info. Turns out I bought a 65-year-old bipod for an experimental version of the M14 rifle. There were only about 5 of my bipods ever made, and the guys sent me pictures from a rifle museum backing it all up. I sold it a day later for $400, but they told me if I found the right buyer it'd be worth $800 to $1,000. In 2004 my grandfather showed me a locked chest in the storage of his home when I was 15. Then he said to me, "The key is on my cabinet." He promised me to open it when he dies. I kept his promise until he died this January 2020. He died at 101 years old. I got the keys of the locked chest on his cabinet, then opened the chest. When I opened it, the things in there were mostly love letters, encyclopedias, maps, records from famous singers. But the valuable thing I found was jewelry and a Rolex and Seiko watch, which is under perfect condition. He dropped some loot for you, bro. When I was 17, I found a driver's license on the ground from a guy who was 22 and resembled me a fair bit. Rarely had a problem getting into bars or clubs with it. It was priceless, to be honest. My friend did this years ago in college. At some point later in the year he was pulled over and had forgotten to swap his real ID back into his wallet after a night out and got pulled over. Gave the cop the fake ID on accident and got into a whole lawsuit for identity fraud or theft or some shit. So my mom and I were helping a family friend deep clean the house to sell. Not rich, but not poor. Well, I found these cool colorful sketch style art prints all rolled up in a corner of his shop. He told us that we could keep them since he wasn't much of an art guy. Turns out the signatures on the prints was Dolly. I had been to a Dolly and Picasso exhibit in Rome, so I recognized the signature. We had them appraised. They were worth quite a bit. Out of respect, we told the guy who gave them to us. He asked for them back, and then he ghosted us with the prints. We aren't in touch with him anymore. Never found out what happened with them. An old book in my grandfather's attic. It was slightly worn and seemed super boring, but I held on to it because I feel weird throwing away books. Turns out it is a first edition of a book that is over 100 years old and is worth a couple $1,000 even in its condition. When I was 9 or 10 years old, I found some metal clips and a brooch while playing in some old ruins. Since our city has been there since Roman times, it was obvious that it might be really old, but usually that stuff isn't worth much. Showed it to the archaeologists at the local museum and turned out it was gold. Everything. They asked where I found that, excavated the area again, and found quite the stash of fine terracotta with coins and jewelry in it. I was allowed to keep 3 things and I chose a perfectly preserved dinner plate, a ring, and a coin. I was helping my in-laws clean their basement prior to moving and found a portable battery-powered color Panasonic TV from 1982. It weighed about 15 pounds and had a 2-inch screen. They were going to bring it to Goodwill, but I decided to keep it and put it on eBay. It sold after a bidding war for over $600. My family Bible. It disappeared for a while. Years ago a sibling of mine passed away. I was helping her children clean out her attic when I stumbled upon a box filled with old books. I was going through them and found one that was tattered and in rough shape. I was about to toss it aside when I decided to open it. Turns out it was the family Bible with a filled out family tree going back to the early 1700s. Quite the find indeed. It's still in my possession. Would you believe my paternal grandfather was born in 1805? I would not have known the exact date had I not found it. Wow, I can't believe you made it all the way to the end of the video. You're the best. If you've ever found any junk that turned out to be valuable, please tell us in the comments below. And don't forget to like and subscribe for more.